I'm doing this video series because there is a 19.1 version of Apex now. I have a complete video series for Oracle Apex 18.1, and the current series will use Apex 19.1 and will follow in parallel with the same steps in the 18.1 series. So I have for software this time XE 11.2, Apex 19.1, SQL Developer 19.1. I will not walk through the steps of installing XE and upgrading to Apex 19.1. You can look at the previous video series and this particular video, Apex 00 of 30, if you want a demonstration of how to install XE and upgrade Apex. The steps of going from Apex 18.1 to 19.1 are the same. So if you want to work along, you can download and install Oracle XE 11.2, or you can use the most current version, which I do not have installed. You can download Oracle Apex 19.1 and go through the steps of upgrading to that. The one other thing that I have is I have also installed a translated version of Apex for Spanish. So if you're interested in that, you can go to the documentation. It's pretty simple to follow and pretty easy to do. But it's not quite as simple as I've seen on a few posts online. It's not just a matter of selecting a different language. You do have to install a set of support files, images, and other things that will provide the translated version of Apex. Once you've done that, then when you log in and go to, in my case, the local install of Oracle Apex, I can pick between Spanish and English. So if I look at my version of the database, as I told you, if I run this, then I can see that I do have 11.2 installed. I can go to SQL Developer Help About and see that I'm working with version 19.1. So let's get started. In this video, we're going to continue working with lists of values. We created some static and dynamic lists of values in a previous video. We will look at our database and see if we need additional reference tables or lookup tables. These provide valid data items that can be input into a column in a table. So we'll take a look at the database and make revisions, which we should do before we start creating more reports and forms in our application for the animal shelter. We'll look at the data model, which is the data dictionary, and we'll decide what additional static and dynamic LOVs are needed. And we'll use SQL Developer to get the data model. So keep in mind that LOVs help ensure valid, consistent data entry. They enforce what we call referential integrity. So you make a list of options, for example, of, let's say, states in the United States, and you give a list that the user picks from rather than letting the user type something in. If you let the user type things in, there will be inconsistencies. And Oracle in any DBMS, database management system, will enforce the integrity rule and make the user choose from the list. So we'll use Object Browser to create a few more lookup tables. We'll add a uniqueness constraint to some columns in the lookup tables, and then we'll be ready to add more reports and forms to our application that uses this database. I have logged into SQL Developer. I'm logged in under the schema name animal_shelter 191. I want to get a visual representation of the database, so I'm going to come up here to File, Data Modeler, Import, Data Dictionary. We did this once before in an earlier video. And I will use the animal shelter schema, select that again, and have all the tables come into the data model, including the 2 lookup tables we've already created. So I'll click Next and Finish. So I've got this representation of the database, the tables in the database. I'm going to pause the video while I rearrange these for better visibility. Then if I want to get a printout of this so that I can make notes as I make decisions about lists of values, then I can go to Data Modeler, Print Diagram, and create a PDF of this diagram. So I'm going to switch from SQL Developer to a PDF I've already created and I've already written on. I just wanted to remind you how to get the data model and also show you how to print this to a PDF. So for the animals table, we have already created a static LOV for category, a static LOV for mix, adult size, sex, house trained, spay and neuter, and we created a dynamic LOV for dominant breed and for status. And we see the dominant breed and status lookup tables in our data model here. For activities, which we see here, I want a dynamic LOV for category and for subcategory, and we still need to create those. For transactions, which is over here, then I want a dynamic LOV for transaction type, such as checking an animal into the facility or placing an animal with a family or with a foster family. Then I want client ID for the person who will be receiving the animal, dynamic LOV. Purse ID for the employee that's processing the transaction, and animal ID for the animal involved in this transaction. We don't need a lookup table for these. These will be derived from existing tables. For the persons table, which I see here, I want a dynamic LOV for the zip code, which is linked to the zip table, which serves as a lookup table, although it was already created without using the object browser create lookup. For employees, we want static LOV for status, role, and then we want a dynamic LOV for supervisor ID, which will come back from the employees table. One employee may supervise another employee. So no new lookup table is needed here. We actually have quite a few things that we need to get done. So I've made a list in Notepad++ to help me keep track of the things that we need to get done in the video. I'm going to go into Apex and into SQL Workshop Object Browser and create 2 lookup tables based on activities, category, and subcategory. So go into SQL Workshop Object Browser. We're working with activities. We can quickly glance at the data and we see category, subcategory. What I want to do is, from the table definition, create a lookup table, and this will be for category, and I'll repeat that process for subcategory, and I'll reselect activities and repeat the process for subcategory. For subcategory, I want to add a column because later on in another video I want to take whatever we select from category and have that limit the options available in the LOV for subcategory. I'm going to need another column here in the subcategory that tracks the related category. So subcategory and category. I will add a column called category. I'm calling it category, variable character 2, length 25, and I'll finish that. So if I look at the data, I don't have anything for category right now in the column that I added. If I look at the category lookup, I don't have much data here. I have medical and I have grooming. So I come back to subcategory. Because there are very few rows, I'm going to enter this data manually here. How do I know what to put out here? Come back to category, and if it's grooming, it's a 2. Come back to subcategory, and I can click on the rows such as bath, and then add the category of 2 and apply that change. Then I see it in the column here. And then for teeth, I'm assuming that's cleaning teeth, so I'll put 2 there and apply that change. I'm going to assume that the rest of these are medical. However, look, I already have problems with my data. I have vaccination and vaccinations. I need to get rid of one of these. Let's see if I can do it. Here's vaccinations. I want to delete this. And I cannot delete it. We talked about referential integrity. I can't delete this because there's a related record in activities that references this category record. So I'm going to find out where there's a 3 and see if I can remove that from activities. Click on activities, do a query in subcategory, look for 3. Oh, I need to specify some columns to display, and I want to display the subcategory. So I have 2 records that are using 3, and I want to switch those to 2. So I'll come in and switch that to 2 and apply that change. Now when I come back to the subcategory lookup, keep in mind the 2 that I'm talking about is this right here, not this 2 over here that identifies category. It's 2 for vaccination. So now I should be able to delete this record, which is essentially a duplicate, just a difference in input. So I click OK and get rid of that. Then I can edit these and put 1, which is for medical. I'll pause the video and do that. So now I have the designation of medical, which is 1, or grooming, which is 2. Before I leave this, I want to do one more thing that we don't get from the nifty-difty tool to create a reference or lookup table. I really like the tool, but this is something we need to add, which is come in to add a constraint. We see 1, 2, and by the way, there's no 3 here. That's fine. This is not numbering. This is simply generating a unique ID. So missing a number in this list makes no difference whatsoever in the purpose of category ID. So don't worry about the fact that it's missing a 3. This is not a count of rows. But I need to set a uniqueness constraint so that somebody couldn't come in and later add bath a second time. So I want to add a constraint, and I want to add a uniqueness constraint. So I will create, and this will be not check, but unique. So I'm going to come up here to category lookup and do unique, and that's going to be on the category field itself. And I click next and finish. And so if I go to data and I want to add a row, I could say subcategory, and I try to type in bath, and that would be a 2, and create this. By the way, the subcategory ID is generated by the database itself. So I do a create, and it says I cannot because I have a uniqueness constraint. I would do this also for the other lookups, such as category. We don't want somebody to inadvertently type in medical or grooming a second time, and this can happen. On breed, I don't want a duplicate here. I'm going to pause the video and add some more uniqueness constraints. You should do the same. I'll show you what I've done after I've done it. So starting with category lookup, I have a uniqueness constraint on the field called category. For dominant breed, I have a uniqueness constraint on the field called dom breed. For status, I have a uniqueness constraint on status, and we had already created a uniqueness constraint for subcategory. We'll now go to the Shared Components section of our application and start creating some LOVs. So I'm working with daily operations. I want to go into Shared Components. We're going to do lists of values, and we're doing something a little different. These are going to be dynamic lists of values, but they're going to combine two or more columns into the single display column. You have two columns in an LOV, the display column and then the return value, which is what gets stored in the related column of the table where you're using the LOV. So if you will look in the description section of this video, I will give you the code that I'm about to use here. Also, I want to point out that there is a video that talks about and explains in more detail what the SQL coding for these LOVs really does. So I'm not going to talk about it at length. I'll be doing copy-paste. You can get a copy of the code in the description for this video. You can get a more complete explanation of the code in the Apex 12.SQL01 video that was for the 18.1 Apex series. Before I create one of the dynamic LOVs, let's look at my list of to-do things. We have done this much of this list. We're now getting ready to do this portion, and then finally I'll do these two static LOVs. So I'm going to do a copy-paste for the client list, just copying the code, come back to Apex, do a create from scratch, and this will be client list dynamic. And I will copy in the code. This is going to take the last name, add a comma, take the first name, add a colon, and then add the purse ID, the unique identifier, and all of this goes into a column called display. Then the purse ID is returned, and it will be what is stored in a column when this LOV is used. So I'm going to create this. Then I'll come back for the employee list and do a copy paste for that. So I'll create an imp list from scratch. It's imp list, it's a dynamic. Copy in my code, replacing the example code, and create that list. Come back and get the next one, which is for zip. Dynamic. Copy in my code, create that list, and one more, which is the animal list, and create that. We'll use these in future videos when we're creating forms and reports. So I have animal list, client list, imp list, and zip list that I have added. I'm going to take one of those. I just copied the animal list code and go over to SQL Workshop just to illustrate what's happening here. I'll go into SQL commands and I'll copy that code in. This is going to take the name, a comma, the breed, a colon, and then the animal ID. And it's bringing that in from two tables, animals and dominant breed lookup. And run that. And this is what I see. I will see in my LOV, I will see the name of the pet, I will see the name of the animal, the breed, the animal ID, and the animal ID is in the return column to be stored in a column when that particular row is selected in an LOV. Back at the application in Shared Components, I have two more things I need to do here. I need to create these two static LOVs. I can go ahead and get rid of that in my list of to-do items. I want to create a static LOV for imp status, which is active or inactive. So reviewing how we do a static LOV, I will do a create from scratch. It is static, imp underscore status, and I just type in my choices. And in this case, what I see in the display field will be exactly what is stored in the column. So I can create that list. Then I'll create another static LOV, and this will be for volunteer VOL, employee EMP, veterinarian VOL. That's actually a typo. That would be VET. I'll pause the video while I type those in. I've typed that in. I'll create that list of values. So now we have completed what we needed to do with dynamic and static LOVs in this video. I thought I was finished for this video, but then I realized I still need to create 2 dynamic LOVs for the category and subcategory. So I'm going to take care of this and come back to shared components, list of values, and I will create, and from scratch, but this will be dynamic, and this will be category list. And instead of typing in, editing the sample code, I'm going to scroll down and use the GUI interface for creating this list. So I will select the table, which would be the category lookup, click Next, then the display column, which is category, that'll be the first column, the return value, which is what gets stored when you make this selection, category ID, click Next, we see the code here, finish, create the list of values. I will do the subcategory, dynamic, use the wizard, the GUI interface to create your code instead of, this would be in place of writing the code yourself, and this will be the subcategory lookup. So this is probably the easiest way to work with this if you're not going to combine or concatenate multiple columns into a single display column. Then use the wizard to create this. Here's the code, finish, create the list. Now we're done. We have done everything that we needed to do, and I'll see you in the next video.